Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Stacie Pettyjohn. I'm the Director of the Defense Program here at the Center for a New American Security. I'm delighted to have with me today General Charles Flynn, who is the commander of the U.S. Army in the Pacific, USARPAC. It's a particularly opportune moment for us to have this conversation as you're wrapping up your tenure in Honolulu, and you have had a wealth of experiences out there and achieved a tremendous amount. So we're going to talk about that and also what remains to be done in terms of shoring up deterrence in the Indo-Pacific region. For those of you in the in-person audience and online, there will be opportunities for questions. The virtual audience, you can ask your questions one of two ways. There's a chat box at the bottom of the screen where you can insert them. Please be sure to identify yourself. We don't take anonymous questions. Or if you're on Twitter, whatever, X, use the hashtag CNAS 2024, and we will pull in questions that way as well. Please get them in early and throughout. I like to intersperse the virtual questions throughout the conversation when they make sense. There will be a more dedicated Q&A period at the end. So I think that's all the administrative information to get started. With that, I'm going to turn it over to General Flynn for some opening remarks, and then we're going to get into the conversation.
Well, thanks, Stacie. I appreciate you asking me to be here and do this, and I appreciate you and Becca, as I mentioned on the lead up in CNAS, for the really the relationship going back to the time I was the Army G3 before actually heading out to the Pacific, and then in my time in the Pacific, just you know, the debates, the back and forth, and the, I guess, asking hard questions of one another about how to operationalize the things we're doing in the Pacific. Been very helpful. So again, just, you know, hat tip to you all, and thanks. I think today I really wanted to express to everyone the aspect of jointness in the Indo-Pacific and the gains being made with the jointness and the Army's role and the interdependencies that land forces and land capabilities can bring to the joint force and the combined and multinational forces that are just so important to our ability to be successful in the region. So I think I'll start. My first point is on our strategy, and I'll just talk about sort of the ends and 4 ways that we're going about how we're trying to gain what I would say is I'm referred to in our updated strategy as positional advantage. And positional advantage, in my view, is having the right posture, capability, messaging, and will forward in areas so that we can support allies and partners and really do 3 things. Increase the confidence of our allies and partners and the network that we enjoy across the Indo-Pacific. The other thing is to increase the interoperability of our allies and partners, the multinational and combined forces, and the joint force. And then the third thing would be to deny key terrain, and that is a combination of human terrain and physical terrain, to our adversaries that are out there seeking to dominate those pieces of terrain, because that key terrain is important to them. So positional advantage is the ends. And there are 4 ways that we are going about trying to achieve those ends. The first is organizing. And this is primarily organizing our forces that are at Joint Base Lewis-McChord in Alaska and Hawaii. That represents, you know, a 3-star Corps command. That represents 3 divisions. That represents a range of enabling capabilities at the operational level and at the theater level. For many of you that may not be aware, there are 10 flag officer headquarters in Hawaii alone in U.S. Army Pacific. 25% of the U.S. Army is assigned to U.S. Army Pacific. And when we have rotating forces out there, it's upwards of 27 to 30%. So we are a large part of the Army, and we are the largest theater army in the U.S. Army. And so organizing a tailored battle-winning mix of capabilities out of Joint Base Lewis-McChord, Hawaii, and Alaska, particularly in the environments that we're operating in at home station, I'll come back to that in a minute, is a really important aspect and the first way that we have to organize our forces, tailor our forces, train our forces, create mixes and combination of forces to counter the threats and the adversaries that are operating out in the region. The second way we're going about our achieving our ends is through generating readiness. And we're generating readiness primarily at the Joint Pacific Multinational Readiness Center, which has a Hawaii campus and an Alaska campus. It also has an exportable version that we've brought into the region, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But the Hawaii campus, 8-island archipelago, the distance between our training center or the training locations that we have on the island of Oahu and the big island, the Pohakaloa training area, is about 150 miles. It's 100 miles from the coast of China to Taiwan. So the Hawaii op area, the archipelago, tropic, jungle, mix of environments that are there, plus the benefit of having and being surrounded by joint forces from all the components, and the fact that the multinational forces coming there, instead of going all the way back to the continental United States, they are finding that to be invaluable, not just in cost savings to them, but in our ability to show and demonstrate different combinations of capabilities in Hawaii. I'll jump up to the Alaska campus. For those that are not familiar with what the Army possesses in Alaska, the Army possesses what's called the Yukon and the Donnelly Training Area, or there's another acronym called JPARC. So the airspace, again, and these massive training areas that we have up there from Fairbanks to Anchorage. So this is extreme cold weather, mountainous, and high altitude. So again, a totally different set of capabilities, totally different set of conditions that we have to put our soldiers and our formations and our material into. And these two campuses of JPMRC, again, and in Alaska, surrounded by joint forces, less maritime forces up there, but certainly special operations forces and the heavy payload of Air Force capabilities that are up there. So these two campuses give us a unique ability to generate readiness in the theater by bringing our multinational partners there and by creating and pulling together the joint force to do joint training at the high-end tactical level all the way to the most junior company battery troop and squad and platoon level. And then we can connect that into the corps and the theaters in each one of those campuses. There's a third leg to this. That's called, we refer to it as JPMRC-X. That's the exportable version of this, and that is a live, virtual, and constructive simulation wrap that we can bring into the region. The Japanese have a training center, like a combat training center on the island of Hokkaido. Of course, we have a simulation center in Camp Zama and Sagami Depot in Japan, where we can link this already. The Koreans have one on Penn called the KCTC, the Korean Combat Training Center. And then, of course, starting as early as 21, we brought this exportable capability into Indonesia, into a place called Bataraja, which is on the southern tip of the island of Sumatra, and out into Subaya on the eastern tip of Java. These are, again, key terrain in that part of the world. And then in 22, we brought it into, 23, we brought it into Townsville, Australia, where the Australians are standing up a combat training center. That actually was the first time we exchanged, I'll say, the X's and O's of that live, virtual, and constructed simulation wrap to Townsville. And then in just this past year, we brought it to an EDCA site in the Philippines at Fort Magsaysay, where the Philippines are establishing a combat training center. And we put them through the Eaches on that too, and that was very good. And of course, in such a way that they've asked for that to return in 24, and then we're also going to take it and extend it into a place called Lopburi, which is in Thailand as part of Cobra Gold. And the point I'm making on JPMRC and generating, the second way we're doing this, is generating that readiness with those battle-winning mixes of capabilities with joint, combined, and multinational forces, and then being able to demonstrate the distributed nature of a live, virtual, and constructive combat training center capability into the region. Many of the forces have been to our training centers, and many of the leaders in the region have been to our schools, particularly the Army schools. And so they've been to our schools for the education, they've been to our training centers, and they've experienced a little bit of leader development, and they know the value of that. And so they're asking for more of that in the region, and I think this is a very powerful aspect of what we're doing by generating readiness. So that would be the second way, organizing first, generating second. The third way is then from generating that, we're applying that readiness with those battle-winning tailored forces into the region, applying that through Operation Pathways. And Operation Pathways is our campaigning contribution to the Indo-Pacific and to Admiral Paparo's efforts and his campaigning efforts at the COCOM level. In my view, Operation Pathways is, the sequencing and arrangement of more than 40 joint and Army-to-Army exercises that we do in the region every year. And we do that in a way, the timing and the sequencing of that is done in a way where the OAIs, the Operations, Activities, Investments, are meeting the national security objectives of the United States and those of our allies and partners. That is the very definition of campaigning. And the cadence of that every year out there has enormous value on doing the very three things I mentioned up front: increasing confidence of our allies and partners and increasing the interoperability of our formations, increasing the joint readiness of the joint force while the joint force is out operating, and then the third thing, denying key terrain, human and physical terrain, from our adversaries who are very, very active across the sub-regions even within the theater. Okay, and then the fourth and final way is building. What are we doing? We're building joint interior lines, and those joint interior lines essentially go from the Aleutian Islands right down through the first island chain, down into the Philippine archipelago, and almost in a fishhook manner back up onto the Asian continent in the vicinity of Thailand. So what does that look like? That looks like 4 foundational capabilities that the Army provides at scale and at echelon: command and control, protection, sustainment, and collection. So command and control, we have an enormous amount of capacity to C2 from the theater enabling commands. Again, there's 10 of those alone in Hawaii. We have a field army in Korea. We have a Corps headquarters at Joint Base Lewis McChord. We have 3 divisions at my disposal. There's a 2nd division on the Korean Peninsula. Again, the point I'm making here is that a U.S. Army Corps headquarters and a U.S. Army division headquarters and the multi-domain task forces, they can go multinational, combined, and interagency literally overnight. And they are scalable, and they can have distributed C2, so that C2 can be tailored to meet the threat. It can also be tailored to meet the needs of the allies and partners. Protection is a combination of engineering with mobility, counter-mobility, and survivability. Again, we have engineering commands at the operational and theater level. Protection is also medical protection, but the 2-star medical command that I have in my command to be able to do that force protection element for not just U.S. forces, but also allies and partners. And then the third, and probably most important, is the integrated air and missile defense that we have and continue to create with land-based systems. And I'm very excited about the Composite Air Defense Battalion that we're getting ready to put out in Guam by 27, and some of the great work that's going on with LTAMS, IBCS, ALPS Towers, RIG 360, the FPIC capabilities, and of course there's an enormous amount of learning going on in the counter-UAS, UAS, EW fight from both Europe and the Middle East. And then sustainment is a third leg of this. So I'm really excited about, in fact, some of the war games that we have done have borne this out. We need to continue to invest in the Army preposition stocks that are in Japan and Korea, APS-4. We're doing some creative things with our afloat Army preposition stocks. Of course, for many of you may or may not be aware, there's a composite watercraft company that is going to be stationed now in Tokyo Harbor at Yokohama North Dock. Is a port terminal that the Army runs there. With some new watercraft. We repositioned watercraft years ago, back when I was at 3, to Hawaii, And then, of course, we are using a combination of our watercraft systems and doing some creative things with leasing agreements from other capabilities that are operating in the region. So the joint theater distribution centers that we're doing out there, the work that we're doing with unmanned delivery, the JLOTS capabilities that we demonstrated in Australia, the joint petroleum over-the-shore capability, contracting, innovative contracting solutions forward. And by the way, also by having material forward in these locations, you bring industry forward, you bring depot level maintenance forward, you fix forward, you have additive manufacturing. And then of course, on the interoperability side, if countries in the region are looking and seeking to buy some of the systems that we have, then there's a gain with industry by being able to bring some of our lines of communication and lines of supply in the organic industrial base forward, which means shorten supply lines and getting off of, getting onto interior lines of our own and getting off of exterior lines, which just make it really, really difficult in the Pacific to move forces across the expansiveness of the Pacific Ocean. And then the last foundational capability that we provide at Echelon is collection. So this is terrestrial-based collection tied to an aerial layer, tied to the space layer. So for many, many years, I believe out in the Pacific that we've been over-invested in the aerial layer and over-invested in the space layer. Do we have work to do in the aerial layer? Absolutely. Do we have work to do in the space layer? Absolutely. But we have a lot of work to do in the terrestrial layer, and there are things that we need to have on the ground and on the surface of Mother Earth at sea to be able to do collection in a unique and creative way. We're learning so much and have learned so much from the Middle East and Europe that this same means needs to be applied out there. And of course the Army has got its Titan edge node, it's got the terrestrial layered system at the brigade level. We're doing some creative things out there with PED and data fusion. We're doing some creative things with edge processing and forward edge nodes. And so the collection capabilities, particularly on the scale of the threat that we in U.S. Army Pacific are charged to look at. So, PACAF is looking at the air threat, PAC Fleet is looking at the maritime threat. My job as the TJ Flick is to collect on the land threat. And I often remind people that you're not going to invade Taiwan with a Navy and an Air Force. You need to generate an invasion force to invade Taiwan. Well, that invasion force exists in the Eastern Theater Command, and it is 3 Army groups, and it's north of 55,000 Chinese soldiers in those combat brigades. And then, of course, we are also charged with keeping an eye on their rocket forces, which are vast, and many of them. And making sure that we can have the adequate layered collection from the terrestrial to the aerial to the space layer, and fusing all that information back so we can see, sense, and make sense of actually what's happening out there is really, really important. So, the ends is positional advantage. The 4 ways: organizing, generating, building, and applying are the 4 ways we're going about our business. I'm thankful for the means that we've been able to secure over the last couple of years. It's been a bit of a dogfight to have that happen, but the campaigning effort that we have underway with U.S. Army Pacific and the work that we are doing with allies and partners in the region is really, really important. Final 2 points, and I'll be quick here. I think that framework of positional advantage and then the 4 ways we're going about to achieve our ends of the positional advantage is really important in combining the other concepts and the other services and trying to create those interdependencies and build on the jointness. So ACE and multi-domain operations, so the Agile Combat Employment of the Air Force, their ability to have hubs and spokes, their ability to generate air power, their ability to generate and regenerate sorties is predicated on the fact that they need protection, they need the delivery of ammunition, and they need the delivery of fuel. We give them that capability. We have to have these 2 concepts. Ours is doctrine now, and there are real capabilities with it. And we had a really good session with General Schneider, and I had one previously with General Wilsbach. So I think this is maturing, and you'll start to see more of this in the joint and Air Force and Army exercises that we're doing out in the region to make sure that we can deliver on this, this very, very difficult concept of distributing this air power through these hubs and spokes, but being able to make sure that we can put security forces there and then be able to have the adequate Class 3 and Class 5 and then keep UAVs and cruise missiles and other missile threats off of those air pods that we so desperately need. And then I think the other one is through, distributed maritime operations and expeditionary advanced basing, and I'll say the maritime components capability to bring these capabilities. Of course, there's a natural fit between our multi-domain task forces, the Marine Littoral Regiments. There's a natural fit on being able to, as I mentioned earlier, like this, key terrain out there in the Indo-Pacific is about being able to seize, hold, and defend pieces of land so that we can control the tempo, control the pace, and moderate what is going on between us, the joint force, and our partners in the region. I think I spoke enough about, so those are the concepts that we're trying to pull together, create those joint interdependencies of the force out there. And then I think I mentioned the Joint Pacific Multinational Readiness Center in my generating comments, but I'm very, very excited about the number of combinations that can be created out there with joint training between Hawaii, Alaska, and the exportable versions that are in the region. So that's enough for now. So
that, sir, was a tour de force. I should have expected nothing less. And I'm laughing because I realize that we've failed you by not having a map here. So you could have been drawing on it and helping us to understand the geography of the situation, which we know is one of the biggest challenges in the Pacific region. So you covered a ton of ground there. I can cross off a bunch of my questions, which is good. We can cut sort of to the heart of it more quickly. You talked a lot. You started it out by opening with jointness and how the Army works with the other services and enables allies and partners as well. And I heard a lot less about the Army as sort of a primary means of force projection from you in the region. So I was just going to ask, what do you think the balance is between the Army contributing, its tremendous logistical resources and fulfilling its Title X responsibilities in the Pacific? We know that the U.S. always fights jointly, like it's never one service, and that is one of our greatest strengths. But also, being the service that is at the pointy end of the stick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think I'll go to campaigning first. I mean, I think the work that all of us are doing out there, all the components in support of U.S. Indo-PACOM is, I mentioned in Operation Pathways the more than 40 Army-to-Army but joint exercises. I think the value of us bringing capabilities to each of those exercises and then taking our concepts and finding ways to identify the capabilities that we have that we want to continue to invest in, but then also identifying capability gaps that exist, and then being able to go back to the our service headquarters, but also to the Joint Command, Indo-PACOM, and say, listen, if we don't fill this gap, in the next 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, we're going to have to either mitigate the risk in some other way, or we're going to have to continue to rehearse to bring the risk down so that we can overcome what we know is going to be a capability gap that exists now. I think that that work going on at JPMRC in Hawaii and Alaska, going on at the exportable versions that are in the region, and then the increase of those, I'll say, combined and multilateral activities at multinational exercises is a really important part of what Admiral Paparo and all the component commanders are working on. To the point on sustainment, I was actually quite proud of last year when we fueled 2 airfields on the northern coast of Australia through joint petroleum over the shore from vessels that were hooking up to lines and then pumping gas onto the Australian continent to be able to put gas into northern airfields for the air component. And I would contend the J-lots that we did in Australia was a rehearsal for what ended up going over to the Middle East, and they hadn't done that scale of delivery in a long time. In fact, some of the combinations of those capabilities, in fact, 7TBX was at Fort Eustis, Virginia, and it deployed all the way out to Australia to set that up. So, not knowing at the time it was going to have to set up a bridge in Gaza, and of course, you know, it still delivered a lot of time. I know there's, you know, some folks that may be a little critical of that, but the fact of the matter is that stabbed the beach and it delivered relief to an otherwise very, very challenging spot. So these capabilities, you know, being brought out to the region and then being tested and used throughout the region in those joint exercises is invaluable for the joint force. And again, it creates those interdependencies that we have to make sure we make investments on.
Absolutely. I mean, Northern Australia, the roads wash out. Getting fuel to those airfields that the Air Force really hopes to use is going to be difficult at any time. So you talked a lot about campaigning, and I saw Beck over there smiling because I think it resonates with her and her report, Campaign of Denial, and what you've been doing with Operation Pathways. And there's been so much activity in this area in Indo-PACOM in general with different combinations of countries and partners working together. You talked about through the JPMRC and the exportable version, but there are all of these minilateral efforts that seem to be bearing fruit. Which ones, or can you point to a few examples that you think are the most promising, and some other instances where you've practiced capabilities that you think are really important? Yeah.
Thanks for the question. So let me point to one that's really promising. The combination of Salakanib, Balakatan, which is an Army-to-Army exercise with the Philippine Army, and then Balakatan, the joint exercise, and other exercise, and in Japan, the Marines have Resolute Dragon, the Army has Orient Shield, and then we have a very, very high-end command post exercise at the corps level and the ground component command. And I guess this is one where I have seen, you know, just enormous growth. So I'll take you back in time. Yamasakura, Army-to-Army exercise at the corps level. That was, you know, for the better part of 35 years. That is now a 4-nation Australian division. There are 4 divisions that play from the JGSDF, 2 regional armies, and their ground component commander, which is the operational command in Japan. And then, of course, U.S. forces, we bring 2 divisions and a corps. The MEF plays down in the Southwest Islands. And then this past year, we had Philippine observers. And then, of course, the Philippines and Japan just signed an agreement. So now Japan can participate in exercises like Balakatan in the Philippines. So here you have an Australian division. You have multiple Japanese divisions and multiple regional armies in Japan. You have the joint force that is available in Japan. And the timing between Balakatan, Salakanib in the Philippines, Orient Shield, Resolute Dragon, and Yamasakura in Japan allows us the opportunity to reposition capabilities, reposition forces, set networks up so we can exchange information. And I think the value of that alone is just extraordinary. And again, if I go back in time to, you know, between 2014 and 2018 when I was there as a 2-star, that was not in the cards. Yet today, and I go even back to 21, coming out of COVID, that was not happening. But that is happening today, and that is a very real outcome of, I think, you know, the asymmetrical advantage of being able to build trust on the ground with these armies and be able to pull these forces together to bring these exercises in a way that really gets done by the human-to-human relationships that are created in each one of these countries. I'll give you another example For many of you, you may not be aware, but Talisman Sabre, 10, 12 years ago, that was an Army-to-Army exercise. In 23, that was 30,000 soldiers, 15 nations. And, we were also able to take equipment off of the Korean Peninsula, U.S. equipment off the Korean Peninsula, and bring it down to Australia by watercraft, use that on the continent of Australia, because Talisman Sabre really went, not just into its near abroad there in Southeast Asia, but it was from Perth all the way to Townsville. After Talisman Sabre was over, we actually used Army watercraft to reposition Australian tanks to Indonesia for Garuda Shield. So Garuda Shield in Indonesia used to be in 2 spots. We signed a comprehensive strategic partnership this past year with Indonesia. I believe that had a lot to do with what we were doing in going from an Army-to-Army exercise in 21 with Garuda Shield. So in 22, that became Super Garuda Shield. That had 12 countries and north of 8,000 soldiers, sailor, airmen, Marines, and a joint construct there. So I could go on and on. There's probably 3 or 4 other examples, but those are 2 really good examples from, the Aleutian Islands and Hokkaido all the way down in the second island chain, or first island chain, to Australia, and then back up into to Southeast Asia with Indonesia.
Those are great. That really helps to show the breadth and sort of how you've also deepened the types of cooperation that you're pursuing with different partners. I need to remind the audience online, if you have questions, to pose them. I promise I'm going to turn to those soon. So obviously, the United States and its allies and partners can conduct exercises to demonstrate our capabilities, but so can our competitors. And right now, China has announced and may be undertaking, I'm not tracking exactly the time difference, exercises around Taiwan. And what have you seen with this latest exercise and over your experience in the Indo-Pacific in terms of China's capabilities and what it's demonstrating and capable of doing now?
Yeah. This is a concerning part, and and you're right. There's a large exercise going on now. There were other parts of this exercise that were going on earlier, but to your question, I think when I have the luxury of being able to look back. I mean, I can look back to the late 90s. I left in 2000, but I'll stay focused on this last decade when I first came back out there for my second assignment in 2014 to 2024, almost 25. When I left in 18, they were not doing anywhere near the things that they were doing in 21. And now the scale of that in 24 is different. And so when I think back to, the combinations and capabilities that they had in 2014, I see a very, very dangerous trajectory. And so let me point a couple of waypoints out here. So 2015, they go through a reorganization. That reorganization catches up with its modernization. That reorganization also, as part of it, they built training centers. I mean, they're taking pages right out of our book and putting them in place to build a force. The A2AD arsenal that they have created, right? I mean, it is historical in the scale of what they have. And I always refer to, they have 3 things that we lack. They're operating on interior lines. They're right there. They have mass. And then they have magazine depth. And so these 3 things are what we have to counter. And so if you think about the capabilities that they had in 2014, the reorganization, the modernization, and the training effort that they went through in 2015 to say 2018, 2019, and then I look at the multi-echelon and the scale at what they're doing exercise-wise. And then I think about the reach that they're having in places in South Asia, out in Oceania, and elsewhere. Again, I point this out as a dangerous trajectory that they are on. And I'll also categorize it with 3 words that I describe the path that they've been on. It's been incremental. This has been going on for some time. This just didn't start in the last decade. It's been going on for the better part of 20 to 25 years. There'd be some out there that say they started 30 years ago. So the incremental path that they've been on, the insidious nature of that path, in other words, the lawfare, the corruption, the behavior of some of the way the forces are operating out there, you know, that is concerning. And then the third word that I described is irresponsible. And the irresponsible part of this is that they are violating the territorial integrity and national sovereignty of the nations in their neighborhood. And they're doing it in a way that is, in many ways, it's helping us because it's turning the allies and partners away from them. But the challenge for the allies and partners and the nations in the region is, you know, they have an economic relationship of necessity. And yet we can never cede or give up being the security partner of choice. They have to continue to want to work with us. And I think that we do that best when we build trust, when we create relationships, and we reinforce to them that their protection, their freedoms, and their prosperity, it matters. And it matters not just in the region, it matters to the United States, and it matters to the globe. And so I think that that's the concerning part to me. So I'll end on this note. So if that's the trajectory they've been on from 2014 to 24, if you can think out in time from 24 to 34, and then you think about President Xi is 70, might be 71 at this particular point, you know, he's got to make a decision, in my view, in the next decade. And so we have to slow this trajectory down. And how do we do that? Well, my theory of the case is that we have to gain positional advantage. We have to organize a battle-winning mix and tailored set of capabilities. We have to generate readiness in the region. We have to apply that readiness through a campaigning approach with operation pathways, and then we have to create our own interior alliance to take time and space, create interoperability, build confidence in our allies and partners, and to deny key terrain, human and physical terrain, to our adversaries that are out there. And by the way, there are multiple adversaries. I had a conversation, you know, just now about the PRC largely. But you have a North Korean problem and you have a Russian problem out there. And of course, you know, I think everybody in this audience and those that are listening, you know, that is, Stacie, what I will say is 3 years ago, that is now a very, very different combination given a limited regional war in Europe and a limited regional war in the Middle East and the you know, the combinations, if you will, between what North Korea, Russia, and China are doing.
Couldn't agree more. As our colleagues Richard and Andrea have coined them, along with Iran, the axis of upheaval are definitely creating problems for the United States and its allies across the globe. I have 2 capability questions, one that's going to incorporate one from the virtual audience, Bill, and then one of my own. As we've seen, you know, in all of these conflicts and crises that are happening right now, and that our former colleague Andrew Metrick argued, it's a world full of missiles. Missiles are the coin of the realm. Yeah. And the Army, with the end of the INF treaty, has moved back into the very long-range missile business with mid-range capability, which has recently deployed to the Indo-Pacific. So I want to know how you think that MRC contributes to the deterrence and how allies and partners in the region view it, as well as from Bill online, he asked about the Joint Fires Network and how that fits into your idea for operations, because obviously it's not only going to just be Army missiles, there are Air Force and Navy and Marine Corps missiles, and who's actually commanding and controlling them, deconflicting them, and using them to the greatest effect is a big question. Yeah. Okay. So let me take the second part of this first, and I think I'd rather sort of approach the Joint Fires Network with. And these are new organizations that the Army has created in order to play the role it's required to play with land-based long-range precision fires, from hypersonics to mid-range capabilities to HIMARS PRISM. So you may not be aware, but at the theater Army level,
We have added a theater fires element, which is about 125 fires experts. There's a theater information directorate that's about 60 folks doing largely non-lethal targeting. And then there's a theater strike space effects group, which is bringing together EW, space, and some select cyber capabilities. So those three elements are at the theater army level. Those are new organizations that we have created and are still building out. The fires effects is there, the TIAD is building, and the strike effects group is building. But the fact of the matter is, at the theater army level, to the joint, I'll just say the joint fires enterprise, rather the network, those capabilities, those organizations give us depth to do lethal and non-lethal targeting, to play the role that we have to play in the indications and warnings and support to joint targeting, so that we can properly employ the multi-domain task forces and all the other strike, counter-strike, and missile defense capabilities at the operational level in support of the joint force. The multi-domain task forces and the corps are out. They're gaining and maintaining contact in all domains. They're seeing, sensing, and making sense of what's actually happening with the threats. They're part of the Joint Fires Enterprise. That targeting has to be fused together through forward edge nodes. We have to have a agnostic transport, and we have to have data at the edge and fused data for us to be able to do that and share that, being platform agnostic as to who does the strike, right? The other thing that I'm really excited about, and I think the Army, I know there's critics out there, but I think, at least given what I've seen and what I'm seeing, I think the advance of these advanced composite air defense battalions, where we bring together the integrated fire protection platform, IFPC, the LTAM sensor, IBCS, RIG 360, and ALPS towers, and you already mate that with what we're doing with THAAD and Patriot and the software integration of those, and the TPY2, TPY spy sensor network. This ability to be able to have what was originally designed to be a defensive capability to sense and do an intercept, and then to cross-cue an offensive platform to do counterstrike, to me, that is game-changing when it comes to being able to do missile defense and then being able to do counterstrike with long-range fires. Now, there's a lot to unpack there. You know, there's deep sensing that's got to be there. I mean, when I grew up in the Army, you know, we could see further than we can shoot. And now we have systems that can shoot further than we can see. And so we are going to have to work with the intel community and the Navy and the Air Force. Again, this is where, you know, the fused data and the cloud sharing of our information between each of the components is going to be so vitally important for land-based systems that can sense, and then land-based systems that can intercept, and then land-based systems that can do counterstrike. Of course, bringing all that together with air and maritime-based platforms that can also do the same thing, that is a joint combination we must have. And again, back to the interdependencies and the jointness of the force, we concede no domain out in the Indo-Pacific. And while air and maritime are important and space and cyber are important, so is the land domain to be able to have these interdependencies. And then, by the way, one other aspect of this thing, you know, the Type 12 missiles that the Japanese are investing in, right? This is their version of being able to do what I was just talking about. BrahMos being purchased by the Philippines. The Australians are purchasing HIMARS and PRISM, and probably other long-range strike systems. So, I mean, again, I think the multi-domain task forces, the multi-domain operations doctrine that we have, the combination capabilities that we're bringing in, the posture improvements that are ongoing. I think these are all really important aspects of us learning and growing out there on the Joint Force and pulling together Joint Fires enterprise to have that deterrent effect against what the Chinese have been doing for years. And so you asked me about the mid-range capability. The fact of the matter it is there by the invitation and with the consent of the Philippine government. We brought it over as part of our normal exercises, and they and we are learning as a result of us training together, operating together, and being together. And I think, again, that's one of the things that we add great value to the region in those Army-to-Army relationships.
Absolutely. And we're going to bring questions. I think it's important you noted that it's not just offensive missiles, the defensive missiles, and integrating those. We're seeing how important not fully integrated defensive fires are in Ukraine. So really pulling that together for a layered defense given the Chinese and North Korean missile threats.
That's right.
Could you identify yourself?
Sure. Hi, Patrick Tucker from Defense One. Good to see you again, General. So this one's a little tricky because it's policy related, but presumably you would be advising the policy, and you're the best opinion on this. So just in terms of your opinion, you mentioned the deterrent effect of the MDTFs and the Marine Littoral Regiments. In your opinion, if the U.S. were to place an MDTF team or maybe 3 of the Marine Littoral Regiments on Taiwan, would that have a deterrent effect that would justify the risk?
Yeah, that is absolutely a policy question, and so I'm not going to render my opinion on it. So the multi-domain task forces are operating in the exercises, again, you know, by the invitation and with the consent of the countries that we train with in our normal exercise schedule. And the countries that are advancing their own capabilities, as mentioned, we're all learning from one another by bringing those formations and those capabilities into Yamasakura, Orange Shield, Resolute Dragon, Balakatan, Salakanib.
Is there anything you can say about an optimal force posture on Taiwan?
No. Okay. We have a long-standing relationship with Taiwan, and I'll leave it at that.
I think the ultimate defensive force posture for Taiwan is not being 100 miles from China, but that is a difficult thing and not really mutable. Other questions? Sorry, I'm making Molly run around.
General, nice to see you. Paul Tennant with HII. If I can take you into cuckoo land, let's just for a second assume that it was a good time for an Indo-PACOM commander to be from the Army. Let's assume it's you. What are the first sort of 3 or 4 things that you would do? I mean, this is obviously not in any way denigrating the current or previous Indo-PACOM commanders, but there is a different perspective which an Army Indo-PACOM commander would bring, necessarily so. And assuming that idea had political support, and assuming you were selected to do it, what do you think you would choose to do a little differently by way of force posture or training or the sort of joint focus that you might just sort of tweak?
I mean, I don't know if I would. I think. Well, first, Paul, good to see you. Thanks. I think what I would say is. One of the things I'm really proud of in the last 3.5 years is there is I think a renewed recognition of the criticality of land forces in the region. And I think that, you know, maybe because of my years of experience out there, there's one aspect of what we provide that is an asymmetric counterweight that's unmatchable against, again, the incremental, insidious, and irresponsible behavior of all the threats that exist out there, the most profound one being the PRC. And it is this. The region is defined by armies. 65% of the Japanese military is Army. 70% of the Philippine Army, or 70% of the military in the Philippines, Army. They have 12 divisions. They have more divisions than we have in the U.S. Army. 75% Indonesia, 75% Thailand, 80% of the Indian Army makes up its military. I guess the point I'm making is, and I mentioned this earlier in my opening, but 65% of all of the State Department International Military Education and Training seats in our schools are Army seats. So many of these Army leaders in the region have gone to our schools. The armies in the region also, much like ours, birth their special operations forces. In fact, many of them are still part of those forces. And so when I talk about the strategic land power network out there, Paul, I'm really talking about that, in my view, is the greatest asymmetric counterweight that we have to what the PRC are doing, which is literally going after key terrain, physical terrain and human terrain. And we can get in the way by denying that key terrain, physical and human, by having those relationships, training together, educating them, and doing just the hard work that soldiers, Marines, Special Operations Forces, and these large armies that exist out in the region. And so I guess to summarize, Paul, what I would say is, and I think Admiral Paparo absolutely gets this, is that there is an asymmetric value in what Army forces do across Asia by being a security architecture that actually binds the region together. And that takes a lot of hard work. It takes partnering. It takes persistence. But it is absolutely a strategic advantage that this nation has, and our U.S. leadership out there wearing an Army uniform on the ground, in the villages, out in the districts, and understanding the security situation in each one of these countries through the eyes of the people that live in those countries. That is, that is our special power out there. And I see what has happened in the last 3.5 years, and I take great pride in what we have actually accomplished by bringing that strategic land power network together as a counterweight to what the Chinese are doing.
Jung Cho with the Voice of America. North Korea today blew up parts of the roads and railways connected to South Korea. And over the weekend, North Korea accused South Korea of flying drones over its capital. And this also follows on the heels of Kim Jong-un threatening to use nuclear weapons against South Korea and the United States. Do you think the possibility of localized military clashes along the demilitarized zone is higher now than before? And what do you make of North Korea's future trajectory? And also, you also talked about North Korea and Russia's military cooperation. How does that change the threat environment in the region?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Stacie and I talked about this before we get started here, but something that is very different from, certainly from 10 years ago, but even from 3 years ago, and I would say that in my time in uniform in almost 39 years, I'm not aware of the North Korean military having real-time feedback from their weapons, their ammunition, and technologies, given what they're doing in Europe right now with the Russians. So that, to me, is something that is very concerning. They don't have very good ranges in North Korea. I would say that their training is sometimes suspect, or has been suspect over the years, at least that I've watched it. But that's different now, and that's different because they are providing capabilities, and open source reporting. There's manpower that is also over there. So that kind of feedback from a real battlefield to North Korea to be able to make adjustments on their weapons, their ammunition, their capabilities, and even their people, to me is very concerning and something we need to pay close attention to. To the other part of your question, I mean, I am fully confident in the things that General Camera and General Laneve, the 8th Army Commander, and our role on the pen. I think, one of the things that in fact, we mentioned it yesterday in our panel at AUSA, like, 8th Army and 2nd Infantry Division are really unique formations in the U.S. Army. They're the only combined headquarters that we have. They're fully combined. ROCs are in every part of the command at both the division level and at the operational field Army level. That's the only field Army that we have in the Army, and it plays a really, really unique role in Korea. And I'm also very proud of what, sometimes this is a little bit less about what they're doing and more about what we're doing. And very proud of the EDREs that we have, the emergency deployment exercises that we have run from the continental United States onto the Korean Peninsula to demonstrate the ability to deploy heavy formations, draw our preposition stocks. I mean, this past year we deployed an armor brigade minus out of Fort Bliss, Texas, into Korea, drew APS stocks. They stayed over there for a better part of 45 days, got great training. We had a striker brigade already on pen to do that, and we're going to continue to do that. So I think rehearsing all of those things, practicing those, keeping those combined formations, again, I think it's sometimes more about what we're doing and less about what they're doing. And I think that I'm pretty confident that our rehearsals, our exercising, and our training and our readiness levels there are pretty sound. Doesn't mean that we can take our foot off the gas. Doesn't mean we can't. We need to continue to pay attention to what I spoke of earlier, just to the north. One other point I want to mention. I think it's really important, and this is another sort of a combination of an ally advancing their position and recognizing their role in the region. In my previous assignments out there, I think that the ROC-U.S. alliance was often about protecting the alliance. I believe now the ROCs are in a different place and they are projecting the alliance. And what do I mean by that? The fact that we're able to draw material off of Korea and send it to exercises elsewhere in the region, that's totally different from when I was in my previous assignments in Hawaii. The fact that the Koreans are actually projecting power off of the Korean Peninsula, they brought an artillery battalion minus down to Talisman Sabre last year in Australia. They had their largest deployment off of the Korean Peninsula this year to Cobra Gold in Thailand. So these are indicators, in my view, of the changes that are happening with the Korean military. And I'm very proud. In May of this past year, at the LandPAC conference that we do out in Honolulu, I did a panel with the Australian Chief of Army, the Japanese Chief of Army, and the ROC Chief of Army, General Park. And to have the two Army chiefs with understandably the history that those armies have had together. It's one thing to fly airplanes together. It's another thing to sail ships together. It's a completely different thing to have those ground forces training together, and it starts with their leaders, and having them on a panel to demonstrate unity and collective commitment to one another. That is a powerful, powerful message, not just to their two countries and their militaries, but to the region. And I'm actually very proud of the gains that the ROC Army has made about being able to project that alliance into the region, because it's an important message for the Korean people, but it's also an important message for the region.
So you expect Koreans to play a role in a contingency in the region, like Taiwan contingency?
That's for the Korean government to decide.
Right there. This will be our last question because we're running out of time.
Thank you, General. Michael Martin with Reuters. You mentioned a couple things during your remarks, the PLA exercises being one of them, the dangerous trajectory that they're on. Is it incumbent upon the U.S. to slow that trajectory? I believe you said it was, and if so, what is the best way for the U.S. military to slow that trajectory that they're on, or is that a policy decision that happens here in Washington?
No, I mean, I think, again, my contribution to the U.S. Indo-PACOM strategy and campaign is, as I laid out, I believe that, you know, the land power network, which is Army, Marines, Special Operation Forces, and the large armies that exist in the region, we have our work cut out for us to gain positional advantage. Are there corridors of that are mature? Yes. Are there other corridors like the central, the southern, and the western one that need shoring up? Absolutely. And it takes a lot of hard work every day. And so I believe that the ends of gaining that positional advantage, again, because we can bind together the security architecture of the region with those countries, right, to take time and space away and to deny key terrain, human and physical terrain, is really important. The 4 ways that we're going about it is organize, generate, apply, and build. The other components are doing the things that they need to do that capitalize on the strengths of the air component, the maritime component, the space and cyber component. And then I do think that U.S. leadership in that area carries a great weight. As I said to you, mentioned earlier, I mean, you know, there is a, in the neighborhood there, if you will, I mean, there is a economic relationship of necessity that goes on with China. It's undeniable. But the reality of it is the security partnership and the security partner of choice, we need to continue to invest and work on that every single day because it's vitally important to the region and for their freedoms and their prosperity and being able to defend their territorial integrity and their national sovereignty. At the same time, I think it's vitally important for the United States because I think that this century is going to be defined by the relationship between the United States and China in Asia because of the consequential nature of that region.
Well, with that, I think we are out of time today. Thank you to everyone who joined in person and also online. Thank you, General Flynn, for coming and chatting with me. I think we've highlighted how the threats are growing individually and collectively, but also how much progress has been made with the United States and its allies and partners to counter those, and how much you've done to contribute to that. So thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Stacie.